Hey, I'm Laura. I work as a data steward in the Institute of Neuroscience and Medicine at the Research Center Jülich in Germany. Over the last 3 years, I've had the chance to work with numerous large-scale datasets across many different data providers. And I would like to share some of these successes, challenges, and lessons that we've learned along the way. There are two main things that I'd like to talk about. First, the external requirements, such as data use agreements, and the high variability of those requirements. And then second, the internal path that we've taken to coordinate and manage this data to make our lives easier and to work towards fair ideals. Okay, let's get into the external requirements. And the entry point is almost always getting access to the data. Some datasets are open access, and in this case, things are wonderfully simple. The data is immediately available and it's easy. But other data come with restrictions, and the requirements to meet those restrictions can be significant. Can be anything from requirements for IRB approval or an up-to-date list of researchers who access the data, which gets to be costly from a time standpoint with regular student turnover. Sometimes we need to declare the research scope, which also gets to be complex when you need to converge many projects into one. And then there are, of course, reporting requirements for annual reports, research progress, etc. And the thing is, I don't think I've come across any two data providers who have done it the same way. Pretty much everyone has a different idea for the hoops they want you to jump through to access their data. And I understand why they do this. Neuroimaging data is sensitive data. It needs to be protected. And especially with the enactment of GDPR, we need to make sure that we do this right. But variability is the problem. And the cost of these intersecting and highly variable requirements is a challenge. Because each provider has a different view of what these regulations mean to them, it's not as simple as just complying. We're put in the position of trying to interpret and understand both the letter and the spirit of the rules. And it's challenging to do the right thing when implementing it all on the same workflows and infrastructure. Here's an example of how different data use agreements state the extent to which you can or cannot share their data. This, of course, is an expected thing to cover in a data use agreement, but what I want to point out is the lack of a standard language. They're all generally trying to go for and say the same thing, but there's a decent amount of variability and also terms that are not properly defined, like research staff. That could be something that's very broad or quite narrow. The policy should be clear and not require someone to guess what's meant. And then we get into the security requirements, which are probably among the worst parts of this process. The idea of a security policy is good, but I have yet to read a good one and have found very few that are helpful. Many are neutral or ineffective, and some are just plain counterproductive or insecure. And this isn't a good standard to have or to follow. Security is the overarching objective and point, not compliance for the sake of compliance. And here is the distribution of distinct data policies from data providers we work with. The data providers are on the left and the policies on the bottom. And we see just how little overlap there is here. There are, of course, commonalities, but as I just demonstrated, even when they are addressing a common topic, there's quite the variance in language and expectation. Ideally, we would see more overlaps with vertical columns, but in general, they are addressing different objectives. So now let's move on to the internal approach that we take. And it all centers around coordination. We use a GitLab instance to track all issues and requests, and DataLad to manage our data. The combination allows us to flexibly track and structure the data, facilitate reproducibility, and support collaboration and discoverability. And it all starts with the data request issue. Someone in our institute identifies a data set that they're interested in. They fill out a template and provide as much information as they can, and then others get involved from there. We figure out what does upstream offer, what do people in the institute want to have access to, what are upstream's requirements for us to access their data. We collect all that, submit it, everything's good. Now we have access, And if data is available for download via a well-known method such as S3, everything is simple. DataLad supports this natively. But if upstream requires a custom downloader or some crazy non-scriptable way to get the data, then things, of course, are more difficult. But thankfully, DataLad is flexible and extendable, so we can do it. It's just a matter of the effort cost. A quick example of how we've done this before is in the creation of the DataLad UK Biobank extension. We built it to equip DataLad with a set of commands that allow us to obtain, monitor, and restructure imaging data from the UK Biobank. We are able to track any additions, redactions, or fixes, and also directly restructure the data into a BIDS layout. So then once we have the data downloaded, we clean it up. Sometimes upstream is in great condition, the data is organized according to BIDS, there's sufficient metadata, and everything is consistent. But there are many who do not meet that, and so we have to dig in, discover the problems, fix them, extract info from publications, and so on. It all takes effort, but eventually we get the data into a usable enough state. Then, depending on the dataset, we modularize the content into multiple subdatasets. Commonly, we do this on a per subject basis or across acquisitions. This gives us additional flexibility for permissions and storage, and for large datasets, it also provides significant performance advantages as only a subset of the dataset availability needs to be acquired. The dataset is then registered into an Institute superdataset that acts as the main entry point for all data holdings. The superdataset is hosted on GitLab, improving discoverability, but only exposing the top-level directories. The data and availability information are stored on Institute infrastructure where access is encrypted, password protected, and logged to ensure compliance with data use agreements. Credentials are preceded on the infrastructure, making authentication transparent to users. But coordination extends beyond just the initial acquisition of an upstream dataset. It continues through the full data lifecycle. For sufficiently large datasets, which is more and more common, we need to coordinate the computation and storage of derivatives. It's simply too costly for dozens of people to compute and store with no coordination. So we set up a discovery and selection process where people declare their needs and discuss the trade-offs. The resulting derivatives are computed from the inputs, registering their provenance, and then made available on Institute infrastructure. Just to highlight, the fact that this resulting data is linked to inputs provides two critical advantages. First, the inheritance of data restrictions can be more easily tracked, enforced, and audited. And second, the provenance capture enables the deletion of the derivatives when they're no longer as valuable to people, because we can just reliably compute them again if needed. This greatly reduces storage demands and keeps our IT team happy. Then finally, upon a completion of a project, an issue is opened to archive it. Only the few relevant bits are kept, so important metadata details, how the results came to be, and then the data with linked publication. Then this is all pushed into a secure, low-cost archive. And that's a quick run through of our system. If you're interested in learning more about our approach and seeing the full picture, I encourage you to check out my poster, which is available online at this link. Thank you for listening.